Hi and welcome to the National Gallery Young Producers podcast. We're a group with a shared interest in the arts. We want to uncover hidden stories in the gallery and explore how they're relevant to us today.
I'm Bella.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Dan.
I'm Iman.
I'm Emilianne.
And I'm Shamli, and we're interested in shaking up perspectives at the gallery.
We were invited by the gallery to make this podcast to explore current topics related to the Mantegna and Bellini exhibition. This is the official description of the exhibition. A tale of two artists and brothers-in-law, Mantegna and Bellini tells a story of art, family, rivalry, and personality. Andrea Mantegna's brilliant compositional innovation and Giovanni Bellini's atmospheric natural landscapes were groundbreaking. No one had ever seen anything like it before. Following their respective careers in Padua and Venice, and Mantegna's fame as court painter to the powerful Gonzaga family in nearby Mantua, Mantegna and Bellini is the first ever exhibition to explore the creative links between these artists.
I thought it'd be really interesting to start a conversation about what do we understand about the Renaissance? What actually is it?
For me, when I think of Renaissance, I had this weird thing that it's called the rebirth. So it's like things are like fine and then like things have been reborn.
Certainly from the Renaissance art I've seen, there seems to be quite a strong religious aspect. Old art seems to be Jesus, Jesus, baby Jesus, Mary. Maybe Renaissance rebirth is a time that's happening and like a thing that's happening in society.
I think it was like the dawn of them painting like really realistically. And like that's like, come on, like before photography, like if you could paint realistically, that was magic. Like you're literally showing someone a whole new world. It was a big thing, like thinking about it. And the fact as well, like these people are called the Grand Masters or the Old Masters, but when they were painting, they were our age. So they're not actually old.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like it's actually quite relevant to us.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Hello.
We are here in Trafalgar Square, the beautiful Trafalgar Square, in a strangely hot mid-September. I think we can all agree we're slightly uncomfortable in the heat. But we're enjoying the cool breeze coming off these amazing fountains near Nelson's Column.
So we're just about to go and head into the National Gallery now. So the exhibition for Mantegna and Bellini is not open at the moment. It's opening on the 1st of October. So what we're going to go and do is go to the Sainsbury Wing, have a look at some of the Bellinis that are hanging up, and look at any other Renaissance arts and just have a bit of a chat and walk around.
Yeah, see what we think.
So we are currently in the Sainsbury Wing in the National Gallery, and we're stood in front of this Bellini painting, and it's called A Dominican with the Attributes of St. Peter Martyr. The paintings are really interesting paintings, really dark colours, a lot of black. It's like black background, black cloak. So it's basically just showing this religious guy holding some, what looks like palms, and he's just looking into the distance, and it's just an overall really cool painting.
It's moody, isn't it? There's sort of gentle lighting, dark scene, fairly smallish painting. Yeah, it's and he looks bored as well. He looks so. He's sort of looking into the middle distance. His eyes look like they've actually glazed over. They're definitely not focused on anything because one's going one way, the other's going the other. He's just totally out of it. He looks like, you know, when you chat to someone very boring and you just sort of start staring behind them.
Maybe Bellini was talking to him whilst he was painting it and just really had dry combo.
Yeah. You know, I'm one of the godfathers of Renaissance art.
But he's also, got an axe in his head and a little sword in his belly, so he's not,
I'd not call that a little sword. I think it's only little because most of it's actually inside him.
It looks pretty chilled out for someone who looks like they've just been attacked brutally.
Yeah.
Totally. It just looks a bit miffed off, as if it's a mild, like he's run out of staplers in the office. Not that he's gonna die in 30 seconds.
Going back to the idea of the exhibition, so Bellini and Mantegna. So just to clarify, so they were like brother-in-laws, right?
Yeah.
And Bellini's sister married Mantegna.
Yeah, I think, Bellini's sister, Nicolosia, I think she was called. What a position to be in.
Yeah.
Between those two artists, like both bringing one into your family. The competition there must have been pretty intense.
To the two dons of the Renaissance era, yeah. Just imagine that, not realising it as well, the sort of cultural responsibility as a woman or as anyone bringing these two incredible artists together that would the exhibition talks about how they inform each other and so on, but they're totally shaped, the future for history of art and art for the rest of the world. It's amazing. She must have a mad story. So I'm on my way now to interview Caroline Campbell, who's Director of Research and Collections at the National Gallery, which makes up roughly a third of what the National Gallery does, but she's also the curator of the Mantegna and Bellini exhibition.
Well, there are a few things we know. So we know that Mantegna and Bellini really meet when Mantegna marries Bellini's half-sister, Nicolosia. And that seems to start a period where the two artists are very much in contact with each other. They share motifs and subjects, they try out different ways of working, they experiment really with each other in mind. But what I find really frustrating about this, being a woman probably particularly as well, is that we don't know anything really about Nicolosia Bellini. We don't know what she thought about painting, we don't know if she ever painted, though we assume she didn't, and we don't know what her role in this relationship really was at all. So that very much frustrates me. But what I should say is that women in 15th century Italy lived very, very different lives to women today. They weren't really thought, it was thought utterly inappropriate for them to have a public realm. And so a woman who came from a respectable family like Nicolosia Bellini, all you'd really want to know about her was that she was born, she married, and she died. And pretty much that's all we do know about her, and that she had some children. Finding out about women in the past in this far away is always very, very difficult. You can only find out really about them if things go wrong, if there are legal documents, for instance, or disputes. But if a woman's lived a blameless life, there's really not much to find.
So I'm on my way now for a coffee with Professor Francis Amos Lewis, who is an expert in Renaissance art and the history of Renaissance art. And so hopefully he'll be able to tell me a bit more about the kind of roles women had to play in the period. I thought it'd be interesting to begin how myself and my colleagues perhaps had a level of frustration about a lack of female representation in art of this period.
I think it depends on what you mean by representation. That, of course, the most important female, the Virgin Mary, was one of the most popular figures to be represented in Renaissance art. So there's representation in that sense. In the sense of women having a part to play, I think it's perfectly true that there were no female artists, no female painters or sculptors that we know of anyway at this stage. And there were very, very few female patrons because at that time in the 15th century, society was dominated by men, obviously, and women had relatively little role to play. They weren't in charge of their own finances, and they weren't skilled in occupations beyond something like embroidery. But in terms of having creative roles in the arts, I think it's perfectly true that there were not very many women who were in that position. There's a very substantial quantity of portraits of eminent females, aristocratic females. The sorts of portraits, they tend to be in profile still in the 15th century. They tend to be rather detached from the observer, in contrast with some male portraits where there's a great engagement between the sitter and the observer. So female decorum required that the portrayed woman did not take part in any sort of eye contact or conversation with the observer. But within aristocratic and high finance societies within the Renaissance, there certainly were quite a number of portraits.
I think we're all a bit disappointed to find out there's so little information on Nicolosia, Mantegna's wife, given what a unique position she was probably in and what an interesting person she might have been. So I did some Googling to see if there were any other women around at that time that had a part to play in Mantegna and Bellini's lives. And I actually stumbled upon this woman who commissioned Mantegna's works, or quite a few of them, who seems like an amazing woman called Isabella De Este, who commissioned Mantegna's works. He was her court painter. He would basically create paintings for her. And she just seems like a total art fiend. She was chasing Bellini to get him to do paintings for her as well. She was like chasing Leonardo da Vinci, who started doing her portrait. She was totally on it. She was up there with all the main Renaissance artists at the time. She was like commissioning architects and people to make sculptures. And she had female musicians playing in her court. She set up a school for girls. So she was just championing art and artists as well as women.
If like when you're describing her, she sounds like a sort of like old-fashioned opera to me. So yeah, just like her hands are, she's got her fingers and a lot of pies, doing a lot of stuff. What was Isabella's upbringing like in comparison?
She's married to a very wealthy man who was head of sort of some Mantuan gang at the time, likened to the mafia.
Yeah.
So I reckon she kind of had an easy-ish time growing up.
It's quite interesting though, because like you could be like, she had a lot of money, that's why she could do all this like incredible stuff, because without money like you wouldn't be able to like set up a school for girls and like buy all this expensive art. But at the same time you could be like, with that money she could have bought herself another house, like she could have bought herself like lots of clothes. Like I guess like having money is one thing, but like to do good in the world is another thing.
She's possibly the person, like one of the contenders for the people who is Mona Lisa, which is like...
Seriously?
She is like the original woman, the original feminist.
I didn't even know the Mona Lisa wasn't called Mona Lisa.
Actually, that's a good point.
Like, I thought she would just be called Mona Lisa.
What do you think about Isabella De Este as a woman who shapes culture?
Isabella De Este, having said that we don't know a lot about women from the Renaissance period, she's one of those women with whom we do know a lot. She was educated in a way that was very, very unusual for women at that time. I mean, she's the wife of a ruler of a state, a very, very small state, but still, that's a significant position. And her letters survive, and also her correspondence with so many other people too. So you get a very, very clear sense of this woman who is really shaping culture, but she's an exception. She can only do that because of her really quite extraordinary position, not only as the wife of the ruler of Mantua, but also because of her placement in a state that didn't have much political power. And so what power they could achieve was really through soft power, through culture. And what I also find fascinating about Isabella De Este is that in her correspondence, she doesn't come across as a perfect person by any means. She was clearly unbelievably vain and worried about her appearance. She's telling artists they can't portray her in this way because she doesn't look right. Again, these are very, very modern preoccupations, very contemporary preoccupations with image. I think what strikes me more about her is that people don't really change very much, do they? That's what's wonderful about the past, when you can see the same preoccupations that we have today, and hopefully by studying them we can think a bit more about our place, not just in our society, but our relationship really with the past and the future as well.
The Renaissance is a period, from what I've understood, like knowledge and bringing in new talent and discovery, and I think that's quite an interesting time. And I feel like in a sense we could kind of say we're in our own modern tech renaissance. The amount of things that's changed in the last 10 years have been incredible.
Well, you're saying like the invention of the internet, how it's changed the world.
Completely, exactly, yeah. And it's changed, I think, like how we view creativity and how that's gone so much more digital now.
What else can you tell me about the relationship between Mantegna and Isabella?
Isabella wanted paintings to decorate her studiolo, her study. Incidentally, having a study in your private castle is a very male thing. So that's an interesting sidelight on Isabella's character and her ambitions as a patron. But Mantegna was resident in Mantua, and therefore there are no letters between Mantegna and Isabella, which is very sad because there is an extraordinary collection of letters between Isabella and other artists of the time.
As we did more research and we learnt more about Isabella, the more excited we got. especially with this moment of, here's another story, an example of a woman being underrepresented in art at the time, an important woman. But then, Isabella, from what we found, described as the first lady in the world, commissioned painters, sculptors, opened a school for girls, and may even have been the model for the Mona Lisa painting. No?
No, there's no connection there at all.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you can't
No,
do that one.
it's it's a shame, but she's still a fascinating figure. It really feels like Isabella has shaped the culture of the time. Would you agree? Yeah?
Yes, absolutely. And she shaped it by treading on male turf. She entered in, she had a coat of arms made for her specially. She collected antiquities, which is unheard of in females otherwise in the Renaissance. And there's a lovely story, I don't know if you know this one, about Michelangelo, who carved a Cupid, which was based on the antique. It was based on a classical prototype. And he buried it, so to age it, and dug it up again and sold it on as an antiquity, as a piece of Roman sculpture. And the first purchaser of it was fooled by this for a while, and then when he discovered that it wasn't an antiquity, but it was a modern work by Michelangelo, he got rid of it quickly. And who snapped it up? Isabella, because she wanted to have that Michelangelo to be able to compare it with a classical Cupid that she had, so that she could decide which was better and which was more interesting and stylistically changed, whatever. It's a wonderful story, and it shows Isabella as a sort of connoisseur of sculpture of that time, which is really very extraordinary, again, for a woman. Because she was a one-off, and there weren't any other female patrons in the 16th century or who began to measure up with the strength and the determination of her activities in the art world.
What I'm noticing a pattern is that just like we didn't know anything about Nicolassia, the woman who basically brought Mantegna and Bellini together, two of the greatest Renaissance artists, what I don't understand is I've never heard of Isabella De Este before this journey on the podcast, which I think is insane. She just sounds like the modern version, like the Renaissance version of Oprah. I mean, how have we not heard about her? I feel like we constantly hear about all these popes and kings that have commissioned or were patrons of the arts, or people like Cosimo de' Medici. Like the Medici family were like huge around that time as well, in terms of like Renaissance art, and a lot of the time the family was led by the men. So like I just can't believe, if we've known all of these types of people, how have we not heard about her? She seems like such a formidable person, and I just feel like if she was a man, we would have definitely known who she was.
It's nice though that we've got the chance to learn about her, and I think I'm so glad that we found out about her. And yeah, it's lovely when these people come out of the woodwork, women and men, like hidden gems in history. And there's some really great people doing work to bring out these stories.
So my name is Alice Rowe, and I run a project called Her Story, which uses feminist art to engage people of all genders with the women's history that has been systematically left out of the curriculum and culture and education.
What inspired you to start Her Story?
I was listening to the radio, and it was a programme about an exhibition at the Women's Library. And it was all of these different artworks that were representing these stuff that these women had done. And it was the first time in my life that I had realised, I kind of got a jolt in my stomach, that if it hadn't been for the radical actions of these women, my literal, actual physical life wouldn't be possible. I wouldn't be able to be sat here with you, with our chaperone. I wouldn't be able to be educated. I wouldn't be able to do any of the things that I do in my life. And then I felt hugely let down by my education system, that it had taken me to be in my early 20s before I'd felt this sense of past or this sense of presence. So I wanted to start the project initially in schools and universities, just so that young people could get to that point before I did. The journey that I had with women's history, that physical impact that it had on me, having that presence in the world, was really profound. And I feel that if you can't see it, how can you be it? So if you don't see yourself in your curriculum, or you don't see yourself on television, how can you then go on to be that person and be that role model?
And so, specifically thinking about women in the arts, we've talked a lot about Isabella De Este.
So I think that women that have gone before have opened up spaces that all of us can kind of move around in. And I like imagining that when you research one woman, that she kind of pushes out of this canon that's been swelling with men for so long, and she kind of ruptures it, and she opens up space for hundreds more to jump out of. Because it's really easy for us to relate to women in history as one-offs. They're kind of like the exception that proves the rule. We generally have one women artist or one woman scientist, and having one proves that the rest of the women didn't quite cut the mustard. That if they'd been really quite spectacular, we would have been studying about them, learning about them. And so I think what we need to recognise from the women that have gone before, that for every one there will be many, many more, and it's our duty to populate the canon, read about all of them, speak about all of them, and not focus on one singular one. But all of those women have done so much for us just by living and existing and being present. But we need to be rigorous with our research and make sure we don't stop at one per field.
To what extent do you believe that sharing women's history and women's art history is a political act?
So sharing women's history is a political act for me because historically, for hundreds and hundreds of years, it hasn't been shared. And so sharing women's history is redressing that balance, and doing that in a deliberate and unapologetic way is a really clear way for me to do my feminism. We have a really long way to go with feminism. And I think there's a narrative at the moment that says feminism should be inclusive of trans women and non-binary women. And I think this is the wrong way to approach it. To say inclusive is almost saying we should kind of offer a seat to non-binary people and trans women. And actually, our movement should be led by them. We should lead it together, and we should centre the voices of trans women and centre the voices of non-binary people, and make sure that our movement is for all of us, not for some of us and others are let in.
Mm-hmm. I'm with Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss, the writers of Six. In your own words, guys, could you describe maybe what Six is about?
Six is a pop concert musical. Basically, the Six Wives of Henry VIII, who form a pop group and then do a pop concert, taking the audience through kind of their side of the historical story.
In a stupid rhyme, so I picked up a pen and a microphone. History's about to get overthrown. Divorced, beheaded, died.
Obviously, there's the saying that everyone knows: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Then, but wanted to kind of like play around with that, with them each having their own chance to tell their own stories, like rather than just being reduced to these one words. It also is really interesting. Something that we talk about in the show is the idea of. The reason anybody knows who they are being because they're all linked by one man, and how when you put them as a group, that's inherently kind of playing into patriarchal structures, or looking at history in a kind of patriarchal way, because the only reason we have them all there together on stage is because at some point some guy fell in love with them. But then we also kind of make the point that why does anyone know who he is, and why is he so famous? Predominantly because of his 6 wives, not because of anything else that he really did.
Like in our show, like it's very much like about talking about Henry in order to like be like, we don't need you.
Yeah, and also and telling their side of the story, which he was involved in.
Was there a lot of information about his wives?
I didn't know really anything at all about them. It was actually Toby who first wanted to talk about the wives.
All of their lives were so fascinating, and it was such a mental and exciting time of like how much like the country was like swaying depending on like which queen was in power.
We learnt loads about Catherine Parr, which we talk about in the show, about how she was this like published author, which was kind of unheard of for a woman in that time, and how she championed female independent study of scripture, which was like a huge deal. But also it is interesting that there are like a lot of the evidence we have for them is kind of limited. So particularly the interesting one is Catherine Howard, who most of what we kind of know about her early life is from her trial, essentially the equivalent of all your ex-boyfriends turning up and just having a go at you. She has this like misogynistic title that people always refer to her as like a kind of temptress or a seductress or a kind of a slut or whatever, and actually, you know, she was like a 13-year-old woman when her like music teacher was first having like relationships with her. But the only reason we know about any of this is because of these trial evidence. So it's really interesting. It's quite hard to get a full picture of what her life was actually like, because of the kind of skewed nature of the evidence. Sometimes it was like we want to make a really specific point about the way in which she gets talked about and how, with a 21st century perspective, you can see how problematic that is. And then with some of them, it's just like we took the unknown stories, like with Anna of Cleves. Nobody really knows anything apart from the fact that she didn't look like her portrait, and then Henry was like bi and divorced her. But actually she had this amazing life where she basically outlived all of them, including Catherine Parr, the survivor, just like lived in a fancy palace in Richmond and like went hunting.
It's crazy that I learnt so much from your show, because they, like you say, they crop up everywhere. You should know everything about them. And in our podcast, the woman that we're looking at, I feel like, having learnt about her, I should have known about Isabella before. She's just one of these people that had so much influence. Do you think this is a trend that will continue, where people try and shine light on female stories, and is it something you continue to plan?
Yeah, I think what might be something that will start coming out the woodwork more now is, as you're doing with this project and what's happening at the National Gallery, is like not necessarily like telling stories of the famous people in like the right way, or like in a way that they deserve, but also just like putting in the effort to like find people who were doing stuff at the time who were written out of history because of their identity.
Isabella, the musical.
Isabella did the painting to the piano.
I think it's been great just like going through this journey on the podcast through Renaissance art and discovering powerful women like Isabella De Este, and kind of just like gathering more understanding of what the Renaissance actually was. And it was a time of discovery, just like we discovered her.
It's been interesting for us to go from like feeling that women had no impact or were not perceived to have any impact at the time, to finding this woman who's like totally shaped and being a really real cultural icon at the time. So yeah.
I am so glad that we've learnt about all these women and talked to these people, and there's a lot of work being done to bring out their stories. I personally think Isabella's incredible, and aren't we glad that we stumbled onto her? So what a woman, what a story. So next time you're in the gallery, go and check out the exhibition. You might not see any paintings by women, but know that lots of them were commissioned by Isabella. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time, guys.
This podcast was created by the National Gallery Young Producers. Special thanks to our guests, Professor Frances Amos Lewis, Caroline Campbell, Alice Rowe, Toby Marlowe and Lucy Moss, and to our collaborators, Hannah Kemp Welsh, Rachel Craddock, Millie Towels, Mark Brown and Raw Material Music and Media Education. To learn more about the programme, go to nationalgallery.org.uk/learning/young-producers.